everyone, and welcome to the monthly installment of the Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center's monthly science seminar. I'm Melissa Welch. I am the program manager for the Midwest CASC, and I'm part of the Midwest CASC consortium staff hosted here at the University of Minnesota. It's a chilly day around the Midwest, so hopefully you're joining us from a warm place. We're actually doing today's session as a hybrid event. We're fortunate to have our speaker, Sam Reed, locally here. So Sam, thank you for joining us here in person. Thanks to the folks in the room. Thanks to the folks who are joining us online and for the first time, and for those who are already familiar with the CASC's work. And as always, a big thanks to the great work of our communications manager, Jess Del Fiacco, and Sarah Anderson, our research assistant, for organizing this session. I'm just going to say very briefly that in spite of the tense situation we're experiencing here in the Twin Cities, we wanted to proceed with this session and continue to share the impactful climate adaptation work happening across the region. So again, thanks for taking a minute of your day to join us here. The session is hybrid. We are still going to record it. So as always, please adjust your video settings the way you'd like and mute your microphones. That way we get the best audio that we can from the room and from Sam. And if at any point you have questions, feel free to add them into the Zoom chat, or if you're in the room, we'll generally hold those questions till the end. As always, before we begin, we're going to provide just a real brief background on the Midwest CASC as a reminder of the importance of the regional research projects and collaborations that we have. The Midwest CASC is a partnership between the USGS and a consortium of institutions across the region that you can see here on the slide. And we're hosted at the University of Minnesota. Our Midwest CASC is part of a national network of CASCs, all working to produce science that seeks to inform research management to help fish, wildlife, land, water, and people adapt to a changing climate. Specifically in the Midwest, we, and through the consortium, we have several primary buckets of activities that we work on, including conducting synthesis research on topics relevant to our region and climate adaptation, supporting a network of interns, graduate students, and postdoctoral research fellows. We're also supporting a broad network of the USGS-funded climate adaptation projects and researchers here at the consortium. And then finally, we host capacity building workshops like this one, and an annual gathering of Midwest CASC community members. We are gearing up right now to host our annual gathering in Minneapolis I can't say next year anymore, this summer, this August, from August 4th through the 6th. And we'll likely be having workshops on that Monday, August 3rd. So if you haven't yet signed up for our newsletter to stay abreast of those details, please do so. Or I believe we'll drop a link in the chat here to get you over to that webpage, which we will be fleshing out in the coming weeks. One other announcement I'll make here before I introduce Sam is that we are delighted to have postdoctoral researcher Dr. Grace Afram present at our next community of practice meeting. That meeting will be on Monday, February 19th. That's not right. It's Thursday, February 19th at 1 p.m. Sorry about that. Oops, in the slide there. And Grace will be discussing climate indices as drivers of Midwest precipitation and temperature and the implications for urban systems and green infrastructure resilience. So if that is a topic that you jive on, you want to learn more about, please go ahead and join us by clicking on that link and registering for that session. All right, Sam, I get to introduce you now. Sam Reed, our speaker, thank you very much for being here, is currently a climate and conservation manager for Friends of the Boundary Waters. Sam received his PhD from the University of Minnesota in 2023 in natural resources science and management, and subsequently was an Institute on the Environment postdoctoral fellow working on Midwest CASC projects and Midwest carbon leadership projects up until last fall. Today, Sam will be sharing his expertise in forest disturbance work with us. We look forward to hearing about his project with the Midwest CASC that reviewed state forest action plans to identify strategies for climate-driven disturbance regimes. And then he'll also discuss an upcoming systematic review of climate research he's working on. So whether you're in person or online, again, be thinking about the questions you'd like to ask Sam for the Q&A at the end. Sam, you all ready to go?
Yep. Oh,
awesome.
Do I need to unmute or anything? Yeah, you can hear me. Sweet. Okay, team. So Alyssa kind of already gave the title. The alternative title for this talk is Synthesis Research, reading a bunch of shit about a topic so nobody else has to. But before we get into this talk, the reality is everyone in this room is in the Twin Cities. And I think it is worth taking a moment of silence for those who were killed in the last month. So if we could all just do that. Thank you all. Okay. So who am I? Like Alyssa said, my name's Sam, and I'm an ecologist by training. I've done a lot of work in the field, and almost all of my work has been experimentation to figure out like what are new strategies we can apply to help managers out to solve big issues. So on the left, that's me holding a portable canopy LiDAR system we were trialing to see if we could estimate above ground biomass with it. In the middle, that's me testing whether we can fence out deer in order to reduce invasive earthworm populations. And that's me on the right, pointing to a sign that says data, because that's what I do now. I point to various long-term data sets and think about how can we bring together all of this climate data that's out there. Because there is so much of it. There is so much climate data that is out there. It is like trying to drink from a fire hose, which, I wouldn't recommend. And that climate info is sometimes useful, but it really depends on your scale. So, you can look at climate change from a global perspective, from a Midwest perspective, which I love these maps that include Ohio as part of the Midwest, because it is, and some people contest that, but Ohio is proudly Midwest. I'm from Cleveland. So, we can think about climate at the state level. We can also think about it at like a sub-regional level, like Northeast Minnesota. And the way we can make it useful just kind of depends on the scale that we're looking at. And one tool that we have that I am particularly smitten with is synthesis research as a means to, make climate data and research useful and applicable. And basically what synthesis research is, it's bringing together case studies and expert opinion, peer-reviewed studies, stakeholder opinion, long-term data, and summarizing it and bringing it together to inform research policy and debate. Because, like I said, there's a ton of climate work out there, and we need to take tailored and efficient approaches to making sure that we're actually getting good insights from it. And sometimes the distinction between literature review and synthesis gets a little bit muddied. In my mind, literature review is primarily looking at peer-reviewed work, bringing that together and making some insights. Whereas synthesis, in my mind, is bringing together it's a holistic view of an issue. So it's expanding that puzzle to figure out what are your big gaps for policy and research. And there's a whole bunch of benefits to expanding this puzzle. For one, it makes research it can make research way more applicable. If you are taking the entire body of climate work and making it relevant for a region, which hint, hint, we're going to be talking about later, that can make things actionable, especially if you, are asking actionable questions like the CASC does. It also can downscale climate insights. So it can make things, that are like global averages at the global level, it can make it relevant at a smaller level. It can enhance things. It also connects different disciplines. Thinking back to all those bubbles that I showed earlier, it is not just one discipline that approaches synthesis research. We have to embrace social science. We have to embrace indigenous knowledge in climate research. There's so many different knowledge holders that need to be brought to the table to actually make valuable insights. And then along with that, I really do think that synthesis saves us time and money. For one, particularly obvious reason is it means that experiments and studies aren't going to be duplicated. We're not going to do the same things as the person next to us. And even if we do, which is part of replicable science, it means that we can ask, similar questions. We can make sure that they're a lot like we're learning within that body of knowledge. But it also saves time and money because when people put together climate insights from a given region, it means that other people don't have to read all that stuff. It means that, Joe Q Public down the street doesn't have to read 3,500 pages of state forest action plans. I don't know why he would, but either way. Going back to the Midwest CASC, the Climate Adaptation Science Center, these folks are experts in synthesis research, and especially when it comes to climate adaptation. So for those of you, I know there's a number of folks who are coming from like the Friends of the Boundary Water side of things. Just wanted to give a little explanation on what the CASC is. The CASC is leading the science on like helping fish, wildlife, land, water, people all keep pace with climate change, what we call climate adaptation. Sometimes when I say climate adaptation, people get a little bit like, oh, what can we actually do? But the reality is no one contests whether we can tear down or destroy nature or biodiversity. And what I just like to point out is that we can flip that. I think that there is a way in which we can benefit nature. Tribes have been showing leadership in the climate adaptation front, but they have been, they have lived in harmony with nature for time immemorial, and have both taken and received from the natural landscapes that they're in. So I really think that climate adaptation offers reason for hope in climate discussions. And along with that, CASC supports a lot of early career researchers throughout the region as well. They help them to learn how to do effective synthesis research, and how to actually do research that benefits folks that are on the ground, which is an excellent thing. And I was one of those postdocs. This is me with, some of my cohort. I was supported by the Institute on the Environment. Through the CASC, I learned how to do effective synthesis research and have been able to take that onward onto my next step. So just some reflections on my time with the CASC, because, I'm coming back here. It's nice to be in the building that I did my postdoc in. I would just like to say for everyone, I would not be where I am without the Midwest CASC and IONE. I learned how to partner with folks who aren't academics. I really learned how to, step beyond the field-based experimental settings that I was so used to, and how to make, partnerships that are durable, long-lasting, and hopeful. And I will say, the CASC system just does climate research right. It's awesome. I find that when I'm at conferences or whatever, I'm always gravitating towards the CASC people, because the way that they are engaging with tribal, state, federal governments, NGOs, and others to answer questions that are relevant for other folks is just, that's truly what I believe in. It's giving back to the public that pays for our work. So thank you all for thank you to the folks who are putting this together and folks online who are a part of the CASC for everything you do, because it really does make a difference. So going back to what I was talking about before, insights when it comes to climate change, they really vary by spatial scale. And we're going to be talking about two today. One is it's called Region 9 for the Forest Service. It's the Eastern Forest Region. And that's basically from Minnesota down to Missouri and over to Maine. We have one project that's going to be looking at that region. And then another project it's not a full map here, but it's looking at northeastern Minnesota and then northwest Ontario. So this greater Quetico-Superior ecosystem. But let's get into the first experiment. So what did I do with the CASC? I read 20 plans, which sounds like not that much when you say it that way, but it ended up being like 3,500 pages of reading. So I reviewed these state forest action plans, and state forest action plans are comprehensive guides to forest conservation and management within a state. And they're not just focused on state lands. They're not just focused on, national forests or something like that. It is focused on all forests within a given state. And they're meant to be forward-looking and help kind of set the course for how we're going to be supporting and conserving and using forests into the future. And they are mandated to include climate considerations in them. And basically, simply put, I counted every time disturbance or climate change were mentioned across all of these, which ends up being thousands and thousands and thousands of instances. And each of these records or codes is roughly like a paragraph or a figure or like a discrete strategy. And one point that I want to clarify here is I'm focused on disturbance because when I say disturbance, I mean things like windstorms, wildfires, deer, invasive earthworms, so on and so forth. Disturbances are how climate change manifests on a landscape. Warmer temperatures and more variable precipitation patterns are super important, but they lead to this whole host of other things that can either negatively or positively affect forest ecosystems. So disturbances are how change occurs really, really fast, and how we can expect a lot of systems that we love to change quickly with climate change. And there are so many different disturbances out there. The ones we're looking at are just, a small subsection of all the ones that exist around them, whether that be, more wildfires, the Death Star, what have you. I will say, if you look up in the left-hand corner, one that is, I think, I always point out that I think is really interesting, war is a disturbance, albeit, well, we'll see. It might be a little bit more climate driven in the future, but this is a picture of the trenches from World War I, where trees just aren't growing anymore because they are so heavily contaminated in France. So that's a disturbance. And these disturbances, at least some of them, can interact with one another and lead to totally different outcomes. So ecologically, they're interesting, but also from a conservation and management perspective, we have to be thinking about these things. So why review forest action plans? Well, for one, kind of going back to that CASC model of how we do research, people at the Forest Service asked me to do this. I was shopping my original project around and they said, that wouldn't be that helpful. And they were like, but if you reviewed the state forest action plans, that and looked at climate stuff, you really, that would be helpful for us. So I did it. It also gives us a sense of state and regional priorities at a pretty high spatial scale, and allows for some of that variability between states. Minnesota and Indiana and Ohio all operate different from one another, which means that their forest management strategies differ as well. But there's a lot to learn on that state by state level. So by reviewing state forest action plans, we can kind of account for that heterogeneity. And then it also, these plans have to be updated. The next updates are in 2030. So I look for innovative ideas and strategies and big blind spots in these plans as well, so that could be remediated for the future. So we can answer things like, what disturbances and climate factors are prioritized regionally? What is the suite of management strategies for each of these disturbances? And then, like, how are disturbances described in a climate context? So what disturbances did we look at? We only looked at the things that were like climate driven. So we could have looked at like land use change and deforestation due to development, which is the leading factor for forest loss in this region. But these are things that it's less directly connected to climate. These disturbances all have pretty direct links to climate change. So I'd like to ask the team, thinking across this entire region and looking at these disturbances, which one do you expect to be the most frequent? This is always just kind of an interesting game when I present this, because, it might surprise you. Any guesses in the room? And folks on the chat, if you want to just type in. Heat waves.
Someone says heat waves.
Okay.
Invasives.
Invasives. Okay.
Saltwater.
Fire. Others, come on, one more person in the room.
That's the heat waves.
Heat waves. Okay. Flooding, false springs. That's hopeful, but drought. Okay. Let's see. So it was actually fire that was most commonly discussed throughout all of these plants by a wide margin, followed by insect pests and paths and invasive plants. If we wanted a invasives category, the pests and path and invasive plants would have it by a mile if you lump them together, but I didn't. And then, things like herbivores, flooding, drought, all those were relatively low across all of these plants. Weren't mentioned nearly as much and paled in comparison in terms of how many strategies we have for them as well. There were the bulk of all the strategies that I pulled out from all of these plants were for fire, insect pests, pathogens, and invasive plants. So that's something to think about for folks who are writing this into the future and for folks who are managing forests now, because we do have management strategies to mitigate drought. And often those management strategies for drought are connected to things like insect pests and path. Okay, what about climate? So one of these are the terms or the concepts that I was looking for on the climate front. So adaptation and resilience, carbon fertilization, phenology, precipitation, temperature. Which one do you think was, which one of these do you expect to be the most frequent across them? Thinking Minnesota all the way to Maine and down to Missouri. Temperature. Okay. Others?
Precipitation.
Okay. Come on, give me something bold. Precip. Okay. Any others? Sea storage. Okay. Phenology. Also wishful. I wish. Okay. Adaptation/resilience. Well, I saw that Amy put in carbon storage and she's seen this presentation. So that's but yes, carbon storage was absolutely the most frequently discussed climate factor across all of these reports, which is interesting. I mean, it's recognizing that our forests are important carbon sponges, but there's no real carbon market that's out there. There's no real incentive for carbon as of yet. So pretty interesting that this is a lot of the focus. followed by things like adaptation and temperature and precipitation. You know, they were high, but phenology, only 37 measly counts across 3,500 pages. So kind of a bummer. Maybe something to focus on in the future. And like I said, we also collected management strategies by state and disturbance type. And there's some really interesting things that people are putting forward across these plans. You know, people are talking about expanding deer hunting on lands that currently prohibit it. There's folks that are talking about like working with tribes to evaluate reintroduction of red wolves to reduce deer populations or at least change their behavior. Funding and supporting cooperative deer population control. All types of things. And this is really just a small little snippet of the number of strategies that are actually out there. All of these will be published in the near future once the paper gets accepted and will be readily available for people to see and interact with. So what does all this mean? Kind of taking a step back. For one, I think that we need to plan a little bit more for things like drought, wind, and herbivores and floods. These are super important disturbances that are expected to increase with climate change. A little bit of debate with wind, but I think we're starting to see that climate is increasing the number of wind events, particularly in the upper Midwest. And we got to plan for these things. We got to prepare and have concrete strategies to make sure that our forests are prepared for these things as well. Along with that, plans are really focused on carbon a lot of times. And, you know, there's some early warning lights in literature that forest management is taking a little bit too much of a carbon blinders perspective, where we are managing for carbon, and there's concern that we will start managing only for carbon. But climate smart forestry is based on 3 pillars. That little stool can't stand up with only 2. So it's mitigation, carbon storage is really important, but you have to be adapting. You have to have resilient forests into the future as well, so that carbon can be made value or can be held there. And then along with that, forests actually have to support people too. There's a lot of values that are associated with forests, and we depend on them for many, many reasons. So that's another thing to keep in mind. People need to be able to access and use forests, and that needs to be shared. And then along with that, you know, states should learn from their neighbors' disturbance and climate strategies as well. All these states share the same disturbance types. So there's a lot to learn from one another. And, you know, there's plenty of instances where, you know, the states are learning from others, but there might be unique strategies that can be found in each plan that can be adapted or drawn from. So knowing all this, you know, after doing this work, I've taken it and I moved on to the next position, which is exactly what they want us to do. They want postdocs to come here, learn from the CASC, learn from the Institute on the Environment, and take that mindset to wherever they go next. And I've chosen Friends of the Boundary Waters to go to next. Friends of the Boundary Waters are 50 years young. We're thinking about the next 50 years, but the folks who are in this organization, the folks who started this organization were the ones who convinced Jimmy Carter to designate the boundary waters. So we are fundamentally tied to the region. And we're really committed to protecting the boundary waters and all of the beings that depend on it. So what are we doing at Friends when it comes to climate change? What am I applying all of my CASC learnings towards? So I'm synthesizing all of the climate ecology research in the greater Quetico-Superior ecosystem. So that's basically all of Northeast Minnesota and then Northwest Ontario. And then along with that, it's like a synthesis with a lot of bells and whistles. So we're developing a website that hosts a lot of that information, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But before we talk about all that, I just wanted to walk through like, why is this Quetico-Superior ecosystem so special? For one, it is this cultural and spiritual and societal hub. When you consider all of the wildlife that are there, the other species that we depend on, like red pine and wild rice, and all of the different ways we recreate and connect with nature in that region, there's very few other places like it on Earth. And you can see this little kitty being forced to walk the plank. Just kidding. But it's a very special place. And a lot of folks call it home, whether that be the wild beings, the Anishinaabe, or the people the other folks that are living up there. I also think that it's important to point out that like that ecosystem has as much, if not more, protected area than Yellowstone. So like when you just count the Boundary Waters, Quetico, and Voyageurs National Park, that's already bigger than Yellowstone. And it has very few roads in it. So huge chunks of contiguous habitat with tons of wildlife. And I'm not even including state parks in that number either. And along with that, tons of fresh water. So it's just like, it's kind of an ecologist's dream, or it should be. And then lastly, on that waterfront, I don't know, this just blows my mind. Like Northeast Minnesota, 3 major watersheds start there. We have the Rainy River, which flows up to Hudson Bay. We have the Superior Great Lakes, which flows east to the Atlantic. And then the upper Mississippi is up there too, and that flows to the Gulf of Mexico. That's 3 major watersheds like that starting in one part of the state. That's crazy. And it also means that it's a great place to do research and study. But all these things are wonderful, but Northeast Minnesota is incredibly climate vulnerable. There are tons of boreal species that are at the southern range at their southern ranges, which makes them pretty vulnerable to warming temperatures and changes in the atmosphere. So our goals are to collect all this research so that, when tribes and state and federal and municipal governments are trying to write climate vulnerability plans because they live in such a climate vulnerable place, we can save them time into the future. Nobody wants to go back to the drawing board every time that you work on a climate adaptation plan. And we're hoping that we can alleviate some of that and provide useful summaries of all of the climate research that goes on in Northeast Minnesota. And I'd stake a claim that there's probably more climate work in Northeast Minnesota than most other corners of the entire planet. Whether that be the B4 Warmed experiment, Spruce, or the Experimental Lakes area, which is in Ontario, but it looks awesome. I've never been. It's these giant lakes that scientists can manipulate, and you can look at warming and temperature and all that type of stuff. Amazing experiments that really inform how we think about climate. And on that front, celebrating the amazing climate work that's going on in the region as well. That's something we want to And then also, lastly, but also extremely important, we want to create a platform so that the public can access the research that they paid for. Almost all except for the lakes one, that's Canadian stuff. But the top 2, taxpayers paid for that, American taxpayers. So people should be able to access the climate work that came out of that, understand what happens in their backyard. And this is the general vision for what we're thinking of with the website itself. So serving 3 separate audiences, one of whom academics. So hosting all of that peer-reviewed research in the region, along with various reports and data. hosting work or pulling out management insights from all those papers as well. And I mean, it is going to be hundreds of papers that are in there. And like I said, no one wants to read all that stuff. So if we are pulling out management insights, we save people that time, especially if we can point them back to the exact papers that they're connected to. And along with lastly, I think it's very hard to imagine what climate futures in Northeast Minnesota look like. And I'm going to skip ahead one. I think that what we can do with this is we can hire artists to literally illustrate what the future of Northeast Minnesota looks like with climate change. And I'm hoping we can do some type of like choose your own adventure situation using our wonderful USGS resist, accept, direct framework for climate adaptation, where, you know, you decide you want to take an acceptance approach to climate change. We don't want to do anything. What does that future look like? Is it for upland areas? Is it red maple overstories with balsam fir understories? That's a hard, at least for me, that's kind of a hard thing to imagine. That's weird. But then, you know, what if we want to restore prescribed fire to the landscape as a climate adaptation strategy? What do those ecosystems look like into the future? So we want to give people both the data here, but like the visuals of what the future could look like, especially if we are taking action now. We're doing climate adaptation now. We can also answer some cool questions like what species and habitats are most researched in this region? What nature-based solutions to climate change are being tested, and what are we measuring? I've talked to so many folks about this position at this project, and the thing that keeps coming up again and again is monitoring. You know, we need a little bit more of a leg up on climate monitoring. So let's pull out all of the different things that we're measuring across all of these trial nature-based solution runs. Similarly, for climate adaptive management, what are we measuring on that front as well? That can help with coordination among different groups. That can help us to adapt our climate adaptation to changes that we're seeing. And then lastly, is there consensus or disagreement among some of the primary climate hypothesis papers in the region? I bring this up because, you know, there's a lot of discussion about boundary waters turning into an oak savanna into the future. And I think it's worthwhile for us to dig into that and see, like, what does a holistic data set say about that? What are those different futures that we could have depending on, you know, climate adaptive management strategies that we take? So bringing it all together, you know, synthesis can help us to change that climate information fire hose to a garden hose. I thought this was, you know, I feel like people used to share that type of stuff on Facebook all the time. And the boomers are so much stronger because they drank from a garden hose, you know. So we need to have climate garden hoses. But along with that, synthesis can give us actionable solutions for climate change in the region as well. So that could be prescribed fire, that could be assisted migration of oak species, or at least oak genotypes. And I just like this picture a lot. I'm gonna try and apply a pretty clunky metaphor. I think that for me, climate change is something that gives me a lot of hope. You know, it's very obvious that the powers that be are not going to shut off the carbon dioxide spigot anytime soon. And I feel like climate adaptation is something that we can do. We can, you know, take these strategies to the landscape to, you know, get the future that we want, to have beautiful, functional ecosystems into the future. It's a little scary because it's misty and it's hard to see all the way across the lake. But if we get started, I am sure it will be beautiful on the other side. And I'm hoping that this project can really pull out those strategies so we can set a path forward. Last thing, we're going to be hiring a climate conservation associate soon. So looking for critical thinkers who can help bring this project across the finish line in the next 3 years. This is a permanent position at Friends as well. So, keep an eye on our LinkedIn and spread the word when the time comes. Okay. Nice. 12:45, folks. We are in good shape. If you're interested in talking about climate or the next 50 years at Friends, I'm always happy to chat with folks. And if you have ideas on thinking back to the State Forest Action Plan stuff, if you have ideas on how that could be shared and platformed so that whoever's writing the next round of forest action plans can use it, that's always useful. Same with the Friends Climate Project too. All righty, question time. Thank you all.